Hey everyone, and welcome to this tutorial on learning JavaScript through making 7 classic games. My name is Anya Kubo and I'm a software developer and course creator on YouTube. In this course, I'll be teaching you how to use JavaScript methods and properties in order to build 7 games in order of difficulty. This will be Rock, Paper, Scissors, Memory Game, Whack-A-Mole, 2D Breakout, Frogger, Connect 4, and Space Invaders. If you're new to JavaScript, please make sure to do the games in order, as once I cover a method or property, it is unlikely that I will go into much detail on it again. By the end of this course, you will have used all of these JavaScript methods and properties. Now, who is this course for? This course is for anyone who has covered the fundamentals of JavaScript in theory and would like to use it in practice. So in other words, if you are familiar with what a function is, a variable is, what loops look like, and so on, this is the course for you. However, if you have never touched JavaScript before and would like to have a go anyway, please do give it a go and see how you get on. I will be taking things super slow and explaining as much as I can along the way. Now, it is important to stress that these games are just to learn JavaScript and will be the bare bones of the game. This means that I will be giving you the most basic level of code for the game to work. I'm doing this for 2 reasons. Reason 1 being that it would be too much to build a game with all the real features of the official games, as well as tests for them. And reason 2 is that I want to give you the opportunity to take the game, build on top of them, add features, add levels, style them up, and truly make them your own. Now, some of you might have already seen this video before. This is an updated version that takes things much slower with a more beginner approach, so I hope you enjoy it. Next up, we are going to be making a game of rock, paper, scissors. In this game, I will be showing you how to make a game that checks for a win, lose, or draw against a computer that randomly selects either rock, paper, or scissors. If you pick rock against scissors, you win, but against paper, it will lose. If you pick scissors and the computer chooses rock, you lose, but will win against paper. And if you pick paper, well, you guessed it, you will lose against scissors, but win against rock. If you choose the same answers as the computer, it is a draw. By the end of this tutorial, you have used all of these following JavaScript methods and properties. Okay, so let's get to it with our first example. Now, this approach, as I mentioned, is going to be a little bit more beginner friendly. I think we really sort of take stuff step by step, and we don't use switch statements. We use if else or if statements, as well as just use numbers more than anything, as well as HTML rather than just purely JavaScript. So hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial, and hopefully you watch the other 2 as well to show me which one you prefer better. So yeah, definitely let me know that. Let's go. So first off, here is my project. As mentioned, there will be no styling in this. So I simply have an index HTML file, and then I have linked my app.js file to my index HTML. So because my app.js file is in the root of my project, all I have to do is simply name the file. Obviously, it's a JavaScript file because of the JS extension. We are telling our code editor to treat this as a JavaScript file. So make sure that the script tag is at the end of your body. So there we go. All the code that all the HTML code that we write is going to have to be above this script tag. Now, we could have used a DOM content loader in the app.js file. So I do that in a lot of my videos too. So that is just another way that you can work. So you can put the script tag at the bottom, or you can use a DOM content loaded event listener. The choice is up to you. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do, like I said, I am going to be working with HTML and CSS in this video, is I'm just going to put some H2 tags. So this is my first H2 tag, and I'm just going to put computer choice, and in it I'm going to have a span to sort of break up that H2 tag, in which I'm just going to have an ID of computer choice, because we're going to want to pick that out to work with in our JavaScript file later. So we have the computer choice. I'm also gonna have user choice. So let's put user choice. You can have your choice if you want. It's up to you. And then finally, let's also have a result. So I'm just gonna have result like so and give it the ID of, you guessed it, results. So we can pick it out to work with it in our JavaScript file later. Now, along with that, I'm just gonna have a button. Let's put rock in it and then just give it the ID of rock like so. Again, so we can pick it out in our JavaScript. And then let's have, I'm using Command D by the way to select that. And I'm going to put paper. Once again, Command D so I can select both. And skizzers. Skizzers? Skizzers. There we go. So there we go. Now, if I open this up, I'm going to copy the path and simply go to my browser. This is what you should now see in your browser. So I'm just going to get the inspect up as well. Great. Now the next thing I want to do is do some logic so that if I click on rock, rock will show up here, and at the same time a computer choice will be generated, and then we can figure out who's won or lost. So for this, I'm now going to have to go to my JavaScript file. So in here, the first thing I'm going to do is actually pick out all the elements with these IDs. So I'm picking out essentially the span, and I'm doing it by the ID. So I'm going to use document get element by ID. I could use query selector. I'll show you how to do that in another lesson, but I'm simply just going to pick out computer choice like this, and I'm going to store it as const computer choice so we can work with that element in our JavaScript. Let's do the same for user choice. So once again, I'm simply picking out this span based by the ID. So that's what I'm doing. And let's save this as user choice. And let's do the same for the result, of course. So I'm actually just going to copy this. Let's call this result display and then pick it out by the ID of result, because that's what this is. It's an ID of result. Great. So we've done that. The next thing I want to do is actually get all the possible choices. So there's many ways I can do it. This is the way that I'm going to show you for this tutorial. Const possible choices. And I'm actually going to use a query selector to get all of them. So document query selector all, and I'm going to pick out everything in here that is a button element. Okay, one thing I could have done is given this as a class name of button, and if I gave that same class name to all of these, I could pick it out by class name. But as I only have 3 buttons here and I don't plan on putting any more buttons here, okay, so keep that in mind when you're styling it up. If you want to add more buttons in here, perhaps use the class name on those buttons. Otherwise, this is going to pick up that button that you create. So const possible choices. I've picked out all the buttons so I can use them. Now I'm going to grab the buttons, possible choices, and for each button, or I can call it a possible choice, whatever you want, possible choice. I want to, I'm just going to minimize this because we don't really need that. For each possible choice, I'm going to grab each possible choice and use add event listener to listen out for a click. So if I click any of the buttons, I want essentially something to happen. Okay, so I want this, we can pass through a function. I'm literally just going to pass through a function like so. And then what I want to happen is, well, I want to pass through the event. So E for event. And then I want to actually get the target ID. So whatever I click, I want to get the ID. And I want to save that as the user choice. But I want to save it globally. Okay, so I'm just going to put let user choice, so we can access it wherever. So whatever the target ID is, I'm saving it to user choice, which is going to save it here, so I can use it in my file. So that is what I am storing. So the next thing I could do is actually get the user choice. Maybe we should rename this, because user choice display, because we now have 2 user choice, that you can't have that display. So now I'm going to get the user choice display, and using the property of inner HTML, I'm once again just going to assign it the user choice. Okay, so let's see if that works. Click, scissors, click, paper, click, rock. Nice. Let's carry on. I'm just going to actually put a space there. Oops, not there. What am I doing? Computer choice space, result space. Okay. So we are displaying the user choice. The next thing that I said I want to do is generate a computer choice. So let's write a function that's called generate computer choice. Okay, what's that function going to look like? Generate computer choice. So what I actually want to happen here is I want to get a random number, right? So I can use const random number, and then I'm going to use math random, and then multiply it by, I can use the number 3, sure, if that's what I want. I can also use possible choices length. Okay, so that is the same as just simply putting the number 3. But for beginners, I'll just keep it as 3 for now. Again, like maybe I'll just put, or you can use possible choices length, as that will return a 3. Okay. So now that we've got a random number, I actually need to wrap this in Mathfloor to round down that random number, because that'll give me a random number, okay? And then we want to make sure that it's a full integer. Let's check that. Random number. So that will give me a random number that's actually from 0 to 2 as we count in indexes. So I could just get this and add 1 just for readability if I wanted to. So now let's check this. 1, 3, 2, 2. So it'll always be either 1 or 2 or a 3, right? So there we go. So now if random number deeply equals 1, let's say that computer choice equals rock. I'm just making that up. It could be scissors. Let computer choice. And then if random number equals 2, say scissors. And if random number equals 3, let's say paper. Okay, so, and then let's actually get the computer choice. So computer choice display inner HTML, and just show the computer choice. So now, there we go. Great. Cool. Okay, so we're randomly generating computer choice and randomly generating a choice for us. As I said, I've done it this way as I think it's beginner friendly. However, there is a much neater way we could do all of this that wouldn't involve saying equals 1, equals 2, equals 3, which I'm really excited to show you. But I think as a beginner, this probably might make a lot more sense and is more readable. But you know, let me know. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's actually get the result. So I'm going to write another function get result. Now, if computer choice deeply equals, or equals, up to you, user choice, well, then return we'll get the result. So let result, and then we will say it's a draw. However, oops. So that is 1. Now, if computer choice this time equals rock, oops, and user choice equals, let's say, paper, then who wins? Then you lost, right? Computer, rock, paper, yeah, fine. Now we have rock and scissors. Well, then you lost again. And then we have, actually, no, you win. You win here. Computer is rock, but you have paper, you win. Should really learn how to play rock, paper, scissors. Computer has rock, but you have scissors, you lose. If computer has paper and you have scissors, you win. If computer has paper but you have rock, you lose. What else is there? If computer has scissors and you have rock, you win. And then if computer has scissors but you have paper, scissors, paper, you lose. I think that's right. Oh my god. Okay. Cool. So now that we've got the result, get result, we've got the function get result, I'm just going to put it in here too. So great. Every time we click, we do all of this essentially. Now I could move this function out if I wanted to, or I could just keep it there. The choice is totally up to you. So now let's have a go. Scissors, the computer chose paper. Oh wait, the result's not showing. We didn't do inner let's get the result display in an HTML result. Cool. So paper. Oh, you lose. Scissors. I chose scissors, computer chose rock, so I lost. I chose rock, computer chose scissors, I win. Cool. It's a draw. Amazing. So that is how I would show you how to make rock, paper, scissors as a beginner. As I mentioned, please take this go wild, improve on as you wish. I did do it so it's quite verbose and it's quite easy to read. And of course, I did these random numbers here because I just thought, again, it was more readable for a beginner. So if you are a beginner, let me know what you think. Is this clear enough for you? I'm going to move on. So once again, no styling, of course. Let's do it. In this section, we are going to look at memory game. Memory game is a game where you as the player have to match 2 cards on a board until none are left. We are going to be building out our board game with the use of these following JavaScript methods and properties. By the end of this tutorial, you will have a game that looks like this. Okay, so once again, basic styling so you can take the game, style it up and make it your very own. Okay, so the first thing that we are going to do is start off our project. I'm using WebStorm, which is an IDE that I'm going to use in order to start my project. Of course, feel free to use VS Code or whatever code editor you wish. So in WebStorm, I'm just going to create a new project. So go ahead and click here. It's going to be an empty project, which I am going to choose to call Memory Game, just like so, and click Create. And great. So once my directory has been made, I'm just going to add some files to it. So I'm going to create a new HTML file and let's just call it index.html. So there we go, index.html. And I'm also going to create a CSS file for all our CSS. So a new styles, so .css file, or I could just choose CSS. Just click on that. And of course, a JavaScript file. This is a JavaScript tutorial. So here we go. I'm just going to call it app.js, just like so. So there we go. There we have our 3 files. I'm going to start off with the HTML. So let's first off give this a title. This is just some boilerplate code that has been generated for me by WebStorm. If you don't have this generated, then please pause here and just copy all this out. There we go. That's a little bit bigger for you. Now we're going to have to give this a title. This is not going to show up in our browser. This is actually going to show up in the tab of our browser. So memory game. Once again, this will not be visible. Hopefully you should know that by now if you code HTML, but for those of you who need a refresher, this will be, I'll just show you now. Let's go ahead and open this up. And there we go, memory game. So I used a shortcut that WebStorm offers me, which is just to click here, which will open up in Chrome. But if you don't, just go ahead and copy the path for this file, the index.html file, and just simply paste it in the browser like so. Okay, both ways will work. So I'm just going to inspect the page to show you what we're going to be using to debug. We're going to be using the console log to debug, and then we can also use this tab to see what elements are in here. At the moment, there's nothing in our body tags, but as you will see, memory game is showing up in the browser tab because that is essentially what the title tag here does. Okay, make sure that it is in the head tags like so. Okay, so first things first, let's start off with some HTML. Now, in this game, like I said, this is a JavaScript tutorial, so my HTML is going to be super basic. We're going to be adding most of our elements through JavaScript. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do that now. First off, actually, we do need to link up our style sheet. So go ahead and use the link tag like so. Thank you, tab 9. And the href is going to be styles CSS, just like that. And let's just close off our link tag. There we go. We can actually just make this, sorry, self-closing, just like that. Okay, so what we've done is we've now linked up our style sheet. We have just used the styles CSS file as it's not in any directory, so it's just in the root of our project, the same location as our index.html file. So that's all I really needed to do here. Great, and now let's link up our script. So to do this, I'm going to use the script tag, just like so, and I'm going to use source app.js in order to link up our JavaScript. So there we go. What I am saying is that after all the elements have been read, then I want to go to my script tag and read whatever is in this file. Okay, so make sure to put it at the bottom between your 2 body tags. And once you have that, let's go ahead and start adding some HTML. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add a h3 tag like so, and in it I'm going to keep the score, so just like so, and then with the span I'm going to break this up. So that's what the span tag does, it breaks up these 2 tags. I'm actually just going to pick this out with an ID. I'm giving an ID so we can pick this out later with our JavaScript. So we can now pick out with our JavaScript this whole element. Okay, the span, the 2 span tags by its ID. I'm going to show you how to do that later. So we've got our score, and then I'm going to create a div and actually give it the, we can give it the ID grid if we want, or we can use class because we are going to style it up. But essentially we want to be picking this out with our JavaScript later too. So now if we look in our game, we will just see a score. Okay, we won't see anything else, because, you know, the span tag, it essentially doesn't have anything in it yet. And our div here doesn't have any styling, and it doesn't also have anything in it yet. So great, let's carry on. Oops, source. So first things first, let's actually get to adding some elements to create our grid in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up my app.js file. So as we saw from the beginning, we need to essentially create 12 cards. So we can do this in JavaScript, and I'm going to show you how. First off, I'm actually going to go ahead and start off creating an array. I'm going to call it the card array, so const card array. And an array means we open up these two brackets. This is essentially an array, and I've assigned the array to the value card array. And inside my array, I'm going to be adding objects. Okay, so this is essentially an object. It's going to have a name, and let's go ahead and call this fries. And then it's also going to have an image. And I'm going to put a path to my images, which I'm going to store in an images folder. So again, in here, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new directory this time called images. And I'm just going to put in some images that I have pre-made. Okay, so here they are in my downloads folder. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 food images, one blank image, which is going to be the back of our card, and just one white image for, you know, if we get a match. So all of these, I'm just going to drag into my images folder. I am going to share this repository with you in the description, so you feel free to take these if you wish. Okay, so there you go. As you will see, they are all here now. So now in my array, I'm going to actually put the path to these images. So I'm going to go into the images directory. I'm going into here, and I'm going to get the fries PNG. Thank you, tab 9. Okay, so here's our first object that I have made. And I'm actually going to make another object. This time, let's call this cheese burger. And then, of course, this needs to be cheese burger 2. So we've got our fries object, our cheeseburger object. We also need the hot dog object. So name hot dog, image, images, hot dog PNG. And we are making this array as a reminder, remember, to create our grid with. We're going to use this to create our grid with all of these images on it. So we've got our hot dog. The next thing I want to do is ice cream. So ice cream, ice cream. What else do we have? We have milkshake next. Milkshake. And this should be milk shake. Just one more, I believe, because there should be 6 pizza. And the URL and the file is called pizza PNG. Okay, so there we go. There are our 6 essential images. And I'm just going to go ahead and get all of these 6. Oops. And just paste them in again, because we need 12 cards, okay? We need 12 cards with 2 matching each time. So there is our card array. Now what I need to do is essentially get them, you know, in a random order. So if I just console log out card array and look in the console log, you will now see that same entire array that we just wrote showing up here. Okay, so now to get this sorted randomly, I'm going to show you what to do. I am going to essentially get the array and use the JavaScript method of sort to essentially sort everything in the array randomly. And to do this, I'm going to use math random. And this is a nice trick. You just do that. So this is a little bit advanced, so apologies for this. It's just a nice way or trick to sort an array randomly. So it's definitely one to remember. The sort JavaScript method works by comparing two values, okay? It compares the two values and then sorts through it. And because the math random that you see here returns back a number anywhere from 0 to less than -1, we are checking that it's either, you know, smaller than 0.5 or larger than 0.5. So the first value in the array is going to go, it's smaller than 0.5, and then it's larger than 0.5, and it will shuffle it based on that. Okay, a lot to get your head around, but you can watch my sort algorithm explainer. I will make sure to link that in the description below. This is advanced though, so if you can't get your head around it, don't worry. Just remember that this is a nice shortcut to shuffling an array randomly. Okay, so now if we console log the card array, it should be random each time. So we've got fries, cheeseburger, pizza, hot dog, cheeseburger, milkshake, cheeseburger, fries. So that is working. Let's carry on. So now that we're getting an array that is shuffled randomly, what I'm going to do is use that to create our board. So first off, like I said, let's go in here and let's grab the div with the ID of grid, and we're going to grab it by using the ID. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use document query selector, and I'm going to search for the ID of grid. So this hash here means we're looking for an ID of grid, and we're going to go into our document and use query selector to search for the ID. So this method essentially looks through the whole thing and finds a ID that is grid and goes, okay, that must mean we want this element, the whole thing. So let's save this as something. I'm going to save this as const grid display, or we can just call it grid. It is up to you. So now if I console log grid display, you will see we have picked out the div with the ID of grid. This is looking good. Okay, so we've got the grid. And now, I'm just going to make a little more spaces here so we can see what's going on. Once we have the grid, I'm going to write a function called create board. So this is what a function looks like. There we go. And a function essentially does something, and we have called this function create board so that if we need, we can reuse it, or it just makes everything more readable. So what I want to do is essentially for each item in my array, I want to create an element. So to do this, I can use for each, or I can use a for loop. I'm going to use a for loop as I think maybe that's a bit more beginner friendly. For let I equal 0. So I'm just writing the syntax for a for loop. This is what a for loop looks like. And then we have a number here, and then I increment by 1. So this is the syntax for a for loop. What is essentially saying is that we're saying start from 0, so let I equal 0, and as long as I is smaller than 10, we want to increment I by 1. Okay, so for loop right here, this is what a for loop looks like. And essentially what we are saying is that we want something to happen, 10 times. Because as long as I is smaller than 10, we start counting from 0, so we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, which is essentially 10 items if you're counting from index 0, and then we stop because I then becomes larger than 10, so we can't execute this loop anymore. So what do I want to happen? Well, like I said, I want to create images, right? So I'm going to use document create element, which is a great JavaScript method that will allow us to create an element, and I want to create an image. So I actually just need to write this. So we are creating an image now. Let's go ahead and save this as card. So I've saved it as the constant card. And what I want to do to this image once I create it, well, I want to add one of these images to it. So let's grab the card we have just created. If I actually console log this out just so we can see everything, and I just console log out card, and then perhaps I as well, so we can see what's going on. And now I call this function, because don't forget we need to call the function in order for the function to release all of its wonderfulness and essentially, you know, execute the code in it. So I've called the function now. So let's go back here and refresh this page. And you will see that I'm creating an image tag each time with the index number all the way to 9. So that is what I'm doing so far in my function. So to the image tag, well, I want to get the image. So we've stored this as card in our JavaScript, and I'm going to use another JavaScript method. The method is called set attribute, and we're going to set the source attribute to my image, as well as for now, actually, I'm just going to give it a blank card. So we're going to go into our images directory, and we're going to get the blank card. So blank PNG. So now I'm going to console log out the card after we've added the source attribute with image blank PNG. And we're going to look in source, and there you go. You will see the path to the blank images file. So that's what we have done. Okay, so we've done that. We also want to add, I'm also going to add a data ID so that each card has an ID that is unique. So data ID, and that's just going to be I, so we can keep track of each one. So now let's go ahead and have a look. And if we refresh this, you will see the source and the data ID has been added to my card, or in other words, my image tag. So great. And then of course, we're still printing out the number to the side. So now that we've done that, we can see it. We need to actually put it in something. We want to put it in the grid display. We want to put it in between these two tags. Okay, so that's essentially what we're going to do with JavaScript, however. So what I'm going to do is get the grid display, and I'm going to append the card to it. We can use a pen, we can use a pen child. Okay, there's actually two methods to our disposal. So now, ta-da, we have added the 12 cards into our div with the ID of grid. Amazing. Of course, you won't see it here. Okay, we've added this in JavaScript, and it is being displayed here. Okay, think of this as sort of just more of a starting point that you want to start out with, and then we're adding stuff with JavaScript, okay, and that's being added through this script tag. So that's why you won't see it's being added after this, and that is what is being displayed in our browser. Cool, so maybe let's give this a little bit of styling while we are here. There's, again, not much styling in this because, as you know, as I've stressed many times, I don't want this to be about styling. I want you to be able to take this game and truly make it your own, style it up, really do whatever you wish to it. Add more features, add more levels, perhaps add, you know, like level 2 will have many more cards. I mean, that is totally an option. What I'm going to do is actually use display flex. Well, actually, let's give it a width first. Let's make it 400 pixels and height 300 pixels. This is because I'm just going off of the size of the cards that I pre-made. So now our grid. All right, we need to, well, we can pick it out by the ID as well if we want, because that was a class. I thought I gave this a class of grid, but I gave an ID of grid. So we need to look for the ID of grid. Okay, so now the ID of grid has the width of 400, height of 300, but all of these divs have essentially stretched to fit it. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do, so now you will see that the grid has a width of 400 and height of 300. It would seem we are missing some cards. Why is that? That's because we're only looping to 10. Sorry, that's my fault. This was the boilerplate that I showed you. Sometimes it's good to see mistakes though. Instead of looping over just saying 10 times, we want to get the array and get its length. Okay, so I'm going to get the array and use the property of length to find out exactly how many elements are in our array and how many times we need to loop. So now, there we go. We have all of our cards, all 12 cards. So this is looking good. Maybe I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see everything a little bit better. And I'm also just going to add display flex wrap. Just to get rid of those lines in the middle. So display flex essentially means, so by adding display flex, it means we can utilize the flex wrap, okay, from Flexbox to make sure that all of these divs just wrap over each other nicely, just like so. Great. So that's actually it for our styling. That's all the styling we're going to do. So I'm going to shut this down now and get rid of the index.html file as well. And let's just focus on our JavaScript. So wonderful, we have created our board. And now, once we've created our board, I'm actually going to write a function that allows us to flip the card when we click it. So let's go ahead and write our function for this. Function flip card. So once again, there's our function. That's what a function looks like. And what I'm going to do is essentially think of which card I clicked on. So to do this, I actually need to add an event listener to each card as well. So right here, I'm going to get the card and I'm going to use add event listener of the JavaScript method that will allow us to listen out for events. So in this case, I am listening out for a click. So if I click on the card, I want something to happen. And that something is going to be the function flip card, which I'm going to pass through here as a callback. Notice I'm not calling it, okay? Otherwise it'll be called straight away. I only want to call it if we click on the card. There's loads of events you can pass through here, okay? Just check out the MDN docs. I've chosen to pick click because I want to listen out if we click. We could use mouse over. There's many things you can do. So for now, I'm just going to console log clicked. Okay, so now if I click on a card, clicked. So we are listening out for clicks on the cards. That is pretty good. The next thing I'm actually going to show you how to do is on the click. Well, I actually want to get the card I clicked data ID. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to use the this keyword. The this keyword essentially will let us use whatever element we clicked, okay, and get its attribute. So I'm going to use get attribute to get its data ID. Okay, and then let's save this as let card ID. So now I'm going to say click and it's going to show us the card ID because I'm going to pass that through. This can be a const, it's not going to change. And if I click it, you will now see that I'm getting each card's card ID. So here are the data IDs that I'm picking out and I'm just printing them in my console log. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Please do have a play around here if you wish. This keyword is essentially what is allowing us to interact with whatever element we click. Okay, and we're getting its data ID and we're saving it as the card ID and then we're just console logging it out. So we're getting the card ID, but why are we doing this, right? Well, we are doing this so that we know exactly which card we clicked and we can then pass it through into our array to get the name. Okay, so that's quite cool. And it also means that if someone's inspecting our code, they won't be able to, you know, inspect it and figure out what's under our cards because we're not saying, we're just giving them an ID. So what I'm going to do is I am going to get my card array and I'm going to pass through the card ID that we just picked out in order to return the name. Okay, so if I just, I'll do this step by step. I'm going to console log the card ID. So console log, if I click on this one, well, we know the first one has a data ID of 0. So let's click it. Oops, clicked 0. And I'm getting returned ice cream images ice cream. So we know that the ice cream image lives there now, okay? And we just want to get its name and store it in an array. So for the next time that we click the next one, if they match, we know it's a match. So let's get this object's name. So I can do so by clicking dot name. By the way, actually, let's console log out the whole card array after the shuffle, just so we know if everything's working correctly. So this one's going to have data ID 0, clicked on 0, and we have got its name. So we've gone into the array and got its name because the first item in our randomly shuffled array has the name pizza and has the image, this one. Cool, so hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, please do have a play around here. So there we go. We are getting the card, we're getting the name back from our random card array. And what I want to do is put it into another array. So I'm going to create an array up here. And let's just call this const cards chosen and make it an empty array. I can use const because, you know, we're not going to be changing the array. We're just going to be pushing things into it. So it can be a const. In fact, you know, some people would argue and say that for best practice, it should be a const. So I'm going to get the array and I'm going to use the JavaScript method of push to push an item into that array. And what I want to push through is just the name. Okay, so there we go. And if I console log the cards chosen now, so let's go ahead and click that one. You will see I've pushed in fries into the chosen array because fries must be here. It's the first one. There we go, fries. I've just pushed through the name. And if I click another one, I've added ice cream. So obviously these aren't a match. And what I ideally need to do is, you know, clear them out and start again. So let's deal with that a little bit later, however, because what I also want to do when I flip the card is actually add the image. So once again, I'm going to get this card that I clicked or this element and use set attribute. And this time I'm just going to use source, and instead of adding a blank image, I'm actually going to go into the card array again, pass through the card ID and get that card's image. I think I spelled image. Okay, and just assign it to the card. So let's check it out. Milkshake and pizza, cool. And of course they're not a match. So one other thing that I want to do is if cards chosen, so I'm using the cards chosen array that I just made, and if its length suddenly equals 2, right, because we have 2 items in there, so we want to check for a match, I'm going to check for a match. But let's maybe do this after some time has passed, or you could do it immediately, but I think it's nice to see both the cards first. So for this, I'm going to use set timeout. And I'm just going to pass through a function that I want to check. So set timeout is a timing event, or yes, a JavaScript method that will essentially call a function after a certain amount of time has passed. So I want the first parameter you need to pass through is the function. So we're going to write a function called check match. And the second is going to be the time that I want passed before we call this function. I'm going to say it's 500 milliseconds. So let's write our check match function. function check match. So for now, I'm just going to say console log check for a match. And I'm actually going to get rid of all these console logs so we can see everything a little bit clearer. So click, click, oops, I misspelled something. Console log check for match. Click, click, check for match. Okay, so obviously 2 items are in our chosen cards array, so we're checking for a match. And what do we want to do in our check for match function? Well, we want to do a few things. First off, I want to get both of the items in my chosen card array and essentially check, I guess, if they match. So I'm going to go into my cards chosen array and get the first item, and if it equals the cards chosen second item, so let's make this an if statement. If this is true, if this statement is true, well, then we know it's a match. So let's alert ourselves saying, you found a match. Of course, if you're coding this, you don't have to make this an alert. You can make it a nice, neat pop-up. But, you know, as I said, we're just doing the mega basics here. So there is our alert. And what do we want to happen if there's a match? Well, I'm going to have to go into the cards. We're going to get the cards. So in fact, right before we do this, I'm going to write something that will get every single card on my grid. And I'm going to do this with document query selector, but I'm going to choose query selector all to look for all the cards. So essentially all the, let's say all the image elements that live inside my div with the ID of grid. So I can do this by just selecting all the images because, you know, it's a small project. So I could just look for the image tag, or if you want to add more images later on and be really specific, you could say that you want to look into the div with the ID of grid, sorry, the dots for class name, the ID of grid, and find all the images that look inside of it. So that's if you want to make this project bigger. I'm just going to keep this like this for now because I'm not going to add anything else in there. So maybe it's a little bit overkill. So I'm searching for every image in my entire document. And I'm going to save this as cards. Okay. So if there's a match, what do I want to do? Well, I want to get the cards and I need to go into the cards and find the cards by their IDs. So just like we're saving the names of our chosen cards here, I'm actually going to also make another array, const, and let's call this cards chosen IDs, and make this an empty array too. So when we push the card in, we're pushing in the name, but I'm also going to push its ID in. So push the name, cards chosen IDs, push this items get, or we can just use the card ID. So I'm going to push in the card ID into the chosen IDs. So I'm going to show you what this looks like actually now before we move on. Console log cards chosen, but also console log cards chosen IDs. Whoops. Okay, so click. So what's happening here, these are the cards chosen, and we're also saving the IDs. ID 0 and 1 have been pushed into an array. And now we're going to use that because we're going to go into the cards that we've just picked out. So all the cards in our document, and we're going to pass through the chosen card IDs first item. And we're going to use set attribute source images white PNG. So I'm just going to talk you through this a little bit. So what I'm saying, let's just console log this out. Console log all the cards. So 1, 2. So here are all my images. And what I'm saying is I want to go into, I want to find this card exactly. And I know this has an ID of 0. So I'm going to go into this array and get this card essentially, or this image tag. And I'm just going to assign it the background color of white if the two are a match. So let's just try get a match. Okay, so you found it's a match. And then I've turned this background to be white because I've essentially added a image white PNG to it. So let's do the same for the other one as well. So what I'm going to do is just grab this line, and the second item in this chosen cards chosen ID array, we're also going to add a white image too. Okay, so if it's a match, we add the white images to those cards. What I'm also going to do is on those same cards, so let's go into the cards, pass through the ID, the first ID in the cards chosen ID array. I'm going to remove event listener to stop listening out for clicks on the card. Okay, so that will just stop any weird activities happening because we want to remove the ability to click on the card. So great. And also I'm going to make another array because we want to start collecting const cards 1. Okay, we want to know exactly how many matches we have. So all I'm going to do is cards 1, and I'm going to push in the content of the cards chosen array, which will either be something like hamburger and fries, okay, or whatever 2 matches. I guess if it's matched, there'll be hamburger, hamburger. So there we go. We are recording how many cards we have won, how many matches we have. Great. And of course, we then need to start again. So after all this has happened, so I'm just going to do it down here. We then need to get our cards chosen array and just make it empty again so we can start this process all over again. Okay, so we do actually need this to be a let, because if we want to just replace this with an empty array, that needs to be let. And we're going to change this to a let 1 as well, because we again are going to want this to be an empty array so we can start the whole process again. Wonderful. So we have read the logic of what happens if the 2 cards are a match. Now, we can also do something to alert if we click the same image. So if cards, actually maybe let's save this. I'm going to save this up here as const option 1 ID, just to make things a bit easier to read for us. Option 2 ID, and that's going to be the card's second ID in our cards chosen IDs array. So now I can just simply use this variable instead, just like so, because I am using it quite a lot, so this just makes it a little bit neater. So now if card option 1, so if the ID equals card option 2 ID, well then let's just do an alert. You click the same card, because that is technically true. You have clicked the same image. So that's all I want to happen. Cool. And then we can start again as well. So if you click on the same image, we're going to reset everything. Great. So we've done something for if, you click on the same card. we've done something for if we found a match, but now we need to write something for anything else that happens. So if it's not a match, then what do I want to happen? I guess we just want to change them back to being blank, right? So we just want to flip them back. So I'm going to do that by getting the blank image, which actually isn't blank. We're just turning it back to this one, okay? So we flipped it over. It's become a cheeseburger. It's not a match, so then we have to flip it back to here. However, if it was a match, we just want the white one, okay? So that's what I'm doing. I'm flipping it back, and then we empty both the cards chosen and the cards chosen ID array. So there we go. And then let's also do an alert that says, sorry, try again. Great. Now, the last thing that we want to happen in the check for matches function is if we get all of the cards, right? So if suddenly cards 1, so our cards 1 array length equals the card array length, but then divided by 2, okay? Because obviously if there's 12 cards, we can only get 6 matches. So that is what this line says. We don't actually need to have this like so. And then we can, you can do an alert, or we can also just show it in the result. So I'm going to grab this span by the ID of result, and maybe let's go ahead and pick it out in the same place we do the grid. So we're going to use document query selector to pick out the ID of result, and let's save this as result display, just like so. So if it's the end, we're going to get the results display. I'm going to use inner HTML to say, congratulations. You found them all. Okay? And otherwise, I actually want to just add the score to the results in the HTML. So we add the score when we find a match, right? So I'm just going to get the results in the HTML. And what do I want to display? Well, actually, we could just show this. Let's just show it as a default after every time that we click check match. And I'm just going to show the, I guess the cards 1 array length, right? Because again, if we push something into the cards 1 array, it's just like getting 1 point. Instead of inner HTML, we can also use text content if we wish. So maybe let's go ahead and put that here as well. And then of course, we also need to change these back to being blank. Great. So I think this is it. Let's check it out. So that's a match. We found a match. We get 1 to the score. These turn blank. That's not a match. Try again. And as you can see here, you can't cheat and inspect, right? So we're literally just guessing. I'm not really paying attention. Maybe I should be. There's a pizza. There's a pizza. Found a match. That's 2 points. Cheeseburger. Milkshake. Milkshake. Cool. Cheeseburger. Cheeseburger. Cool. Ice cream. Hot dog. Hot dog. Hot dog. And let's see if this works. Found a match, and congratulations, we found them all, and we can't click on anything else because we've removed the event listener from all the cards. Amazing. So hopefully this made sense. I've really enjoyed teaching you guys how to make this game a memory game. Again, it's just the mega basics. Please take this game, make your own, style it up, truly make it incredible, make pop-ups, add more levels. I can't wait to see what you have made. Now we are on to our third game, which is going to involve some timing events. In this section, we are going to build a game of whack-a-mole. This game will involve us having to build a grid that randomly displays a mole that we have to click with our mouse in order to get a point. We have to get as many points as possible in the time we define. By the end of this tutorial, you will have used all of the following JavaScript methods and properties. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Okay, so first things first, here is my file setup in which I have some standard HTML boilerplate, making sure that my style sheet has the correct path to my actual style sheet, which is here, and same for the script tag to pick up my JavaScript, making sure that the path, the relative path, is the same. So the first thing I'm actually going to do for my game of whack-a-mole is make a grid. So above the script tag, make sure it's above the script tag. I'm just going to make a div that has the class of grid. And in here, well, I'm just going to put in 9 divs as I want my whack-a-mole grid to be 3 by 3. And then I'm going to give each of them a class of square. I could technically add these in JavaScript, but you know, it's not that many. So I'm just going to put in the 9 divs, each with their own ID. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This is so we can identify each one, but I want each one to look the same. So I'm going to style all of them as squares, and that's why I have chosen to do it this way. So there we go. That is our grid. We of course need to style it so we can see it. While we are here, I'm also going to add a h2 tag for the score. So I actually want my score to show up here. I'm going to hardcore code it as 0 and just give this ID of score so we can pick it out later with our JavaScript. I also want to have another h2 tag that is going to tell us how much time we have left. So I want the game to count down from 60 seconds. And I'm just going to put time left. And you know what? I'm also going to give them a label. So quite simply, I'm just going to make it really basic. Please style this better than the way I'm doing it right now. I just want to give you the sort of skeleton to make your own. So your score and time left. Okay, this is looking good. Let's style it up so we can see it in our browser. So in here, I'm just going to pick out the grid. And then the grid, well, I'm going to use display flex, and I'll show you why in a bit. Actually, let's get rid of it so I can show you. So I'm just going to get rid of it. For now, I'm just going to give this a width. So let's say each of our squares is going to have, let's make each square 200 pixels wide and high. So which means this will be 600 pixels. I'm going to give this a height of 600 pixels. So that will look like a square. And then let's, we could give it a border, or we can give each square a border. So let's do that. So every square with the class of every div, sorry, with the class of square. We know we're looking for divs with classes because we put the dot. Same for grid. We're looking for a class, a div, or an element with the class of grid to style. So let's make each square. We decided that each square we want to be 200 pixels with 200 pixels. So height 200 pixels, width 200 pixels. And then I'm actually going to give each one, let's give each one a border. I'm just going to go border color, and be really simple, of black. Okay, so this might be a problem because I don't know how thick the border is, in which case our grid might look a bit strange, but let's go ahead and see. So I'm going to copy the path and I'm just going to put it into our browser. So here is our grid. You can see all the squares inside it. However, they don't seem to have the border color. That's because we need to give it a border style of solid. We can actually maybe just change this. It's too much for me. I can do border solid black 1 pixel. So that's another alternative. It's just like a shorthand of what I wrote before. And I'm also assigning the border a width so that we can know how big the border is going to be. So now if I refresh, we now get the 9 divs stacked over each other. What we need is for them to snake over each other so that they can fit in. And I could do so by adding display flex to my grid. So now if I refresh it, see, all the squares will try fit into my grid. So if I go on grid, there's the grid, and they're all trying to fit in it. I want them to stack over each other like a snake. So I can do that by adding flex wrap. And there we go. Now they don't fit. The third one isn't going here, and that's because we need to make the grid fit the border too. So what will that be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So width 606, and height 606. And there we go. The squares now fit perfectly into my grid. So this is looking good. If I want to see square with ID 3, it's that one. 4 is there, 5 is there, 6 is there, 7, 8, 9. It's literally snaking around. Perfect. Let's carry on. Okay, now I also I'm going to go ahead and make the mole. For the moment, I'm just going to give it a background color of blue, but obviously we want to switch this out later. So we actually probably want like a mole image. I'll show you how to do that. But for now, I'm just going to have the class of mole to be blue. So for example, if I add the class of mole here and refresh, you will see that the third square has a class of mole, so that square has turned blue. We can even see it when we inspect the elements. So that's great. Let's just pretend that's our mole for now until we get an image to put there. Next up, let's do some logic. So let's move on to our app.js file. Okay, so actually I'm just going to remove the mole class from here because we're going to add it with our JavaScript. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually select all the squares so we can work with them in our JavaScript file. So I'm going to do that by using the document query selector. So I'm not making this up. Document query selector all. So that's a JavaScript method that will essentially help us look for anything with the class name. So dot of square. So we're going to search for all those and we're going to store it as squares. Squares. Okay, so we're finding all the squares and we're storing them under squares. Now, even though we don't have it because I removed it, I'm actually also going to store the mole. So I'm going to go document query selector, not all, because there's only going to be one mole at any time. And I'm going to search for the class of mole. So now we have our squares, we can work with them. And then now we have our mole, if it's on the page, that we can work with. Okay, we have 2 more things to pick out so we can do them later, and that is the element with the ID of time left. So once again, document. I could use query selector or I could use get element by ID. But just so you know, in query selector, if we're searching for an element with an ID, we need to use hash and then the name. So this is like an ID. We're searching for an element with an ID of time left. And let's store this as time left. And then finally, one more thing, and that's the score. So this thing right here, we need to get this element so that we can manipulate this with our JavaScript. So once again, I would get document, query selector, and then look for the ID of school. And let's save this as school. Or maybe, yeah, let's just save as school, that's fine. Great. So let's start off with the result as 0. Even though we've hard-coded it, we need to tell our JavaScript the result that we start with is 0. And we'll do the time a little bit later. Let's actually focus on getting the game to work. So I'm going to write a function called random square. So we want to get a random square to put our mole. Now in here for each square, so I'm going to grab all the squares and using the JavaScript method of for each, so that is a JavaScript method, I am going to get the class name. So I could put I here, I could put whatever we want, I could put square. So we could actually use square, maybe that makes more sense. So for each square in our squares array, I essentially want to get the square and I want to go class list, so that is the JavaScript property, and I want to remove the mole if he exists on any of the squares. So we have a fresh slate to start with. So that is what is happening here. I'm getting each square, and for each of the squares, I'm removing the class of mole. So that's the first step that we want to do in our function before we start adding a mole randomly. So I'm going to write let random position, and then I'm going to use, so once again, I'm going to go into my squares array and I am going to pass through. So if I pass through a 0 into my squares array, it would literally get me that first square. If I pass a 1, well then I'm talking to the second square in my array. I need to pass through a random number in here, okay? I want to pass through a random number from essentially 0 to 8, because I want a random index from 0 to 8 because there's 9 squares and we start counting from 0. So I'm going to do this by passing through the JavaScript method of math random like this and then multiplying it by 9. But I'm also going to use math floor to round whatever that number is down. So for example, if I console log random position and look in here, I need to actually call that function. So random square, random position before initialization. Okay, that's because I console logged it up here. Whoops. There we go. Refresh. I'm going to get literally a random square each time with an ID from 1 to 9. Okay, there we go. So that is it. That's what is happening here. If I actually console logged just this, you will see that once again, I am getting a random number from essentially 0 to 8. Let's check that. Math random, my trusty MDN. Okay, math random returns a function from floating point in the range from 0 to less than 1. Okay, so in this case, we multiplied it by 9, so 0 to less than 9. So that is exactly what numbers we're getting back, and we're rounding it down. So that's what we're doing. See, no matter how many times I refresh this, we'll never get anything above 8 because we're rounding down, okay? So 8 is going to be the highest, and that makes sense because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We only go up to the 8th index. So hopefully that makes sense. Have a read of this from MDN if you're not sure and have a play around with it, but that's exactly what we are doing here. Great. So I'm just going to get rid of this for now. Okay. Now, whatever random position, we should probably have random square. I'm going to have random square because essentially what we're getting back is a random square, as we saw by the first console log. So for whatever random square we have, I'm going to use class list add mole class. So once again, we should now get a blue square in a random position. So that's our mole. Every time you refresh the page, putting itself in a random square. Let's carry on. So I'm happy with that, but I actually want to put this on a timer. So I want this to be on a timer. So what I'm actually going to do is, instead of just having the function like this, I'm going to write this in another function so we can attach it to a button if we wish. Move mole. And then I'm going to put let timer ID equal null because we need to actually stop this timer interval from moving. And I'm going to use the JavaScript method of set interval to move the mole. So I'm just going to put random square to generate a random square. And let's say every 500 milliseconds. So this is so now I don't need this here, and nothing will happen if I refresh the page. However, if we invoke the function or call the function, which is why I want to do this in a function, because you now have the option to attach this to a button if you wish, right? Because if I do this now, it will just start on the page load. See? We are getting, I'm not doing anything. We are getting a random square light up with a mole every 500 milliseconds. So that's some extra work for you if you want it. At the moment, I'm just calling the function on the page load, but you can attach it to a button if you wish. So that's working. It is essentially on a timer, and we can use this timer, which is why I've done it like this. I could have just done that, but because it's on a timer, we can actually use this timer to stop our mole again in our button if we wish. So that's optional for you. That's why I've put it there. Cool. So the next thing I want to do is actually listen out for if we hit the mole, because we want to get a point each time we hit the mole. So I'm going to do this up here. And now I'm going to grab the squares, and for each square, for each ID in the square, I am going to get the ID and use add of, again, this could just be square. So let's just maybe put this for square. It makes more sense. For each square in our squares array, I'm going to add an event listener to listen out if we put mouse down. So each time we click on the square, and then I'm just going to put a function here. So I'm passing through the event and then a function of what's to happen if I click the square. And if the square ID equals the square that is the random square, so let's actually save that. I'm actually going to put, so we want to save something. I'm going to put hit position, and then I'm going to get the random squares ID. So I'm literally getting the ID of the square. So I'm getting this thing right here, and that's how we can do it. So I'm getting the ID of the random square, and I'm saving it to hit position. So perhaps I'm just going to put let hit position and leave it as blank. If the square ID equals whatever the hit position is at that point in time, then I want to get the result and add on to the result. Cool. I also want to display it in our score. So score, let's do text content or inner HTML, whatever you want, equals the result. Okay. And then I also want to make the hit position Oops. So clear it out. Hit position equals null again. Okay? Cool. If I could just spell that right, hit position. So this is looking good. So amazing. So that's what happens if we hit a mole. Let's see if that has worked. Now we've got that working. We are adding a score each time we hit it. The last thing we need to do is actually get our timer to stop working. So let's do that. I'm gonna do that below here and then slow it down so we can see it a bit because it's way too fast. So I'm gonna write a new function called countdown. And then in here, so in my function, well, with each time we invoke this, so I'm going to put this, once again, because I'm not attaching it to anything, I could just put set interval. So I'm just going to put this down here and call this let countdown timer ID. So we can stop it if we want, equals set interval. And then I'm going to put this on a set interval. So I'm literally going to pass through the countdown function. And I want the countdown function to invoke every 1000 milliseconds. So it would be like 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And each time I want something to happen. And with that, I want to get the current time. So let's actually write let current time equals 60. So I want to get the current time and I just want to minus 1 from it. And then I actually want to display that. I want to display that in the time left. So time left, text, content, current time. Okay. So that's really it. If, however, current time equals 0, so like we get to the end, I want to clear the timer, so clear interval, countdown timer ID. Okay, so I want to clear this and then maybe let's get an alert that says game over, your final score is, and then the result. So that is looking good. Let's have a go. So to make this a little bit faster, I'm just going to change this to 10. Let's see how we do in 10 seconds. So 0. You can see the timer's working. We're clicking on the mole. We're getting points. And then as soon as we get to 0, game over, your final score is 9. We can do with a space there, but that looks good. Awesome. You can see this is still moving around. We can actually stop that thanks to this timer ID. So I'm just going to move this out so it's global and we can use it here. So we also want to clear interval timer ID. Let's try that now. Once again, let's click, 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 click. Got a score of 5, got a score of, okay. Game over, your final score is 5, 0, and it stops moving. So there we have it. We have now built our game of Whack-A-Mole. If you are interested in how to get an image, let me show you that very quickly. So I'm just going to use this Whack-A-Mole from my GitHub. Feel free to take him. I've already pre-made him to be 200 by 200 pixels. So let's just download that. I'm going to save image and let's save him as short mole. That sounds good in downloads. And then I'm simply just gonna very basically drag him and put him in here. So there he is. And then in my style sheet, instead of having background color blue, I'm going to have background image, and then I'm going to put URL, and then the path to my mole. So it's in the root, so I just put mole JPEG, because it's a JPEG. And then I'm going to put background size cover. So let's have a look at that. And there we go. We have our little mole moving around. So, oops, game over. Final score is 3. Let's fix that space. Okay, score is, put a space there. And let's make it move faster. So let's get a random square, it'll be 500 milliseconds again. And let's change the current time to start with 60 seconds. So once again, boom, boom. This is more realistic. You can of course add levels. You can make them go as fast as you want. Like this is really fast. You will see the score adding and you'll see the time left. So that is it. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on how to make whack-a-mole without canvas and practice your timer skills. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you soon. In this game, we are going to be building 2D Breakout, another retro game. The aim of this game is to break all the blocks that you see in order to complete the game. And of course, once we are finished doing this, giving you the bare minimal logic and code in order to get this game working, I would love for you to take this game, style it up, give it extra levels, and share it with us on Twitter. I can't wait to see what you built. Okay, so let's get to it. The first thing that I want to show you is my setup for the game. So as always, I've created an index HTML file with some boilerplate. So I've simply given our project a title. I've linked our style sheet. So this style CSS file to the HTML file, making sure that the path is correct. So as this file is in my root or the root of the project, that is fine. And I've also chosen to put a script tag at the bottom of my body. Now make sure to make the path correct as well. So index.js is fine as the index.js file is in the root of my project. Okay, so I've chosen to do it this way. You can also choose to use a DOM content loader on your JavaScript page, as long as the JavaScript is after any HTML elements, you should be fine. Okay, so that is it. These files don't have anything in them yet. The first thing I want to do is actually make my grid. So I'm going to do this by simply putting a div here with the class of grid, so like that, which I'm now going to style up in my style CSS file. So I am picking out the class of grid and I am telling my CSS file to class by using this dot. So let's make our grid, I don't know, 600 pixels and a height of 300 pixels. And I'm just going to give it a border of solid black 1 pixel so we can see it. So go over here, copy the path, and then in here, just going to paste the link, and there we go. There's our grid. It's going to inspect the page so we can see our console log up too. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is actually use our JavaScript to start putting in the blocks. So essentially what I want to do, so instead of literally hard coding it in the HTML like this, so let's just make a block for now. I'm going to go class of block. So once again, let's pick out the class block, and I'm going to give it a width of 100 pixels and a height of 20 pixels and a background color of a blue. So now if we go back here, refresh, there's our block. Now it is important that because I'm going to be making loads and loads of these blocks, and I'm also going to want to know the position of each block as well as the I guess positioning of all of these corners, I'm going to make my I guess identifier, or how we're going to be moving the block, this bottom left corner. Okay, so what I mean by this is I'm just going to give this a position absolute, not relative, but absolute, so that we can move things around. We need this here in order to use the left property. So not on here, I want to use it on the block. So I'm essentially using my JavaScript going to be adding left margin and bottom margin to all the blocks to position them. So what I mean by this is if I just go left 50 pixels, refresh, I've moved the block left 50 pixels from this point right here, okay? Well, essentially from this, but I want to make this the sort of anchor point of our block. So I'm going to be using left and bottom to do so. So once again, I'll just put 50 pixels so you can see. And there you go. You will see that the bottom margin and the left margin are the same from this anchor point right here. That is now, from now on, our anchor point of each block. That's important. That's what we are going to be. We're going to be adding left and bottom, but using our JavaScript. So just get rid of that for now. So we've done it. We have created a block, but we want to do it in JavaScript and we want to make 15 of these blocks, okay? We'll make 15 of these. So first off, let's start by making one, right? So to do this, I would use, let's store this as block, so const block, and I'm just going to use document and create element. So there's a JavaScript method that I can use to create an element, and I want to create a div. So we've created a div, we've stored it as a block. Next, I want to give my block the class list that I have already made of block. So without the dot this time, I'm going to add the class of block to my newly created div that I have called block. And the last thing I want to do is actually grab the grid. So, whoops, grid. So I want to grab this grid. I'm actually going to delete this now. Don't need it. I can grab this grid by essentially getting, so once again, documents. I'm going into the document and I'm going to use query selector to look for the class of grid. So I am telling it I'm looking for the class of grid. I have to tell query selector can look for IDs and all sorts of things. So I'm telling it I want to find the class of grid. I want to store this element as, let's say, grid. So now that we have our grid, I'm going to use a JavaScript method called append_child. So I'm not making up, that exists, to put in our newly created block with the style of block. Okay, so let's go check it out. And there we go. We've done that with JavaScript. Okay, we've deleted the one we hard coded and we've added that with JavaScript. So that is pretty cool. But I need 15 of these. So I need 15 of these, and for each one of these, so I'm going to use grid style, and as we said, I'm going to use left. So let's just say for now, I'm just going to put, I don't know, 100 pixels just to show you that it's working, and grid style. Bottom 50 pixels. Okay, so fresh. Oops, not grid. We move the grid. I want to move the block. Whoopsie daisy. Refresh. Okay, great. So we've now moved the block. Bottom 50, left 100. Oops. Cool. So I'm just going to put this in a function. Let's say draw my block function, add block. I'm just going to put all this in here. Function add block. Okay, so add block. Here we go. Save that. Okay, now refresh. There we go. So now only when we call this function, we will create a block. But like I said, we want 15 of these, and I want all of these to be different for each one. So to do this, I'm going to create a class, a block class. So create block individual. And I'm going to use class for this. So class block, let's tell how far we want to deal with a class. And then for this, I need a constructor. So once again, as we discussed, I need an X and a Y axis. So X axis, Y axis, and this is going to be the bottom left of our block. And using this bottom left X and Y axis, I can essentially decipher all 4 points of my block and where they are on our grid. And I'm going to do this using the width of the block. So let's save that const width, block width. And we know this is 100 and the height, which is 20. So 100 and const block height, which is 20. So now using the XY axis, let's get all, so this bottom left. Well, we know that the bottom left is just the generic X and Y axis. So I'm just going to put X axis, Y axis. So whatever we pass through into our block constructor, that's going to be the bottom left of our block. Then let's do bottom right, this bottom right. Oops. And I'm going to pass through. So to get the bottom right, the X axis is, we're going to have to add to the X axis. The Y axis is going to keep the same. So yeah, bottom right, X axis, move it over 100 pixels, Y axis the same. Okay, yeah, that's right, cool. Now we need to get the top left. And the top left is going to be the X axis, and then the Y axis, we need to add the height, block height, and finally this top right. And the top right is going to be the exact like opposite, as in you know, the other corner completely. So we're just going to get the X axis and add the block width, and the Y axis and add the block height. So hopefully that makes sense. We essentially want to find out where each point, each of the 4 points of our block is on our grid at any given moment in time. And we can decipher all of those from the bottom left X and Y axis. Okay, so that's how we're going to be creating all 15 of our blocks, by passing through 2 values. Great. So now let's actually make an array of these blocks. So const blocks, this is going to be all my blocks, const blocks. And then I'm going to create a new block, and I'm going to pass through, well, I guess on the first one, I just want to make one here. So again, we need to add a left. So let's just add a left margin of 10. And because this is 300 pixels, I don't know, let's just put in 270 and see what that looks like. So 10 to 70. So let's just try with this one first. Draw all my blocks. Instead of add block, I want this to draw all of my blocks. So, well, we need to make function add blocks plural. Let's change that. And we need a for loop. So for let I equal 0, as long as I is smaller than the blocks array length. So at the moment it's just 1 in there, but for the future we increment I by 1. Okay, now as long as we want to loop over our blocks array and keep creating these blocks, so we want to essentially get all of this code and put it back in here. Okay, so create a block, add the class of block, then we want to get the blocks left, and instead of just hard coding something, well, we want to go into the block. So we go into the blocks array, then get our first item. So just I is fine because we're going to be looping. We're going to get that first items. I'm going to style it. So we want to get its x-axis from the bottom left, okay? Because we're going to be working with this. So we want to get the x-axis and assign it to the left. So bottom left. And the first item, so we do it like that. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's just look at this again. So we know that we need to give our block styling from the left. So we want that to be essentially this. So that's the styling we want to give from the left. So, and I've just used this as the sort of anchor point. So I just want this value right here, okay? So I can do that by going into the bottom left and grabbing the x-axis. That will give me 10, because that's how this works. By creating a new block, I'm passing through a 10 to be the x-axis, I'm passing through 270 to be the y-axis, and then I'm getting all the other values. So maybe it's worth me console logging this. Console log blocks, and let's just get the first item. So this, refresh, cannot, okay, let's just going to comment this out now because it's throwing errors for us. Okay, so that is my newly created block. I pass through a 10, I pass through 270, and from it we get all 4 points that will create our block. So the X and Y axis of all of them. Okay, I hope that makes sense. We have generated all of these just from passing through 2 parameters. So now we know where each block is and all 4 of its points, and we're going to use that for collisions. So we've created one block, but we want to create loads of blocks. So first off, let's go back to this function. We want to add the styling of 10 pixels. So we need the px to the left, and we want to add, so once again, let's use our anchor. So I'm going to go into the block, first block. So I'm going into the blocks array. I'm grabbing our first block, and then I'm using the anchor. So I'm going to use the bottom left corner to get the second value, so the y-axis, which we know is 270. And then I'm going to just assign to pixels. And then we're going to put that in our grid. So let's refresh. Cannot read property 0 of undefined. Ah, I've misspelled bottom left. Refresh. And there we go. We've drawn our first block. Now let's get to drawing the others. So we just have to now create blocks. This is what's so good about creating classes. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, so we've got our first block. Oh, I need to put commas. That's fine. I'm just gonna D. I'm just pressing Command D to do this. And I'm just gonna go like that. There we go. So now our second block, well, let's put that in position. Let's add 110 pixels to the left, so the x-axis to move it along left. For this one, let's add another 110 to that, so 230, another, so 340, and then another, so 350. I think 5 should be okay. Let's see what that looks like. And obviously we're looping over, so as many as we add, we will create. And that looks great. Let's maybe chop off the grid a bit. Hold on. It's too big, so let's make it 570. Okay, maybe 560. Okay. Done it. Okay, so we've got 1 row. I want 3 rows. So I'm just essentially gonna, maybe I should just use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's delete these. I'm gonna use these, and instead now I'm gonna move the y-axis. So instead of 270, I'm gonna have 240. So I want it closer to the bottom. 2 from 2. 240. And then the fine, let's see how it looks actually first. That looks good. And then once again here, I'm happy with those. So I'm just going to copy. I'm happy with the x-axis for each. With these, I want to move closer by 30 each. So once again, Command D, Command D, Command D, 10. Oops, not that one though. And amazing. We have created all of our blocks. Pretty cool. So now we've done that. I'm pretty happy with this. We've drawn out our blocks. Let's get to creating a user. So just like we did before, add user. I'm going to, let's store it as user. I'm going to get my document. I'm going to create element. I want to create a div. Now user, I want to style class list add, and I need to make a, essentially I just want to make it the same as a block. I'm just going to call it user and maybe make it purple just so we can see the difference. So this time I'm going to add the class of user, and once again I'm going to get the grid. I'm going to use append child to put in our user. So our user will appear there, but we sort of want to move it here, right? So we want to move it in this row and down here. So just like we did here, I can do that. I would get the user, use style left, and then, well, let's give it a position. Can't start position, or actually let's call it user starts. We don't know what other starts we want. And then let's make it start. We want to make it start in the same x-axis as the middle one, so 230. And let's just say 10 pixels from the bottom. So we've got our user start. That's where our user is always going to start. But then we also need a current position. Okay, let's just do it. Yeah. So we have a user start from where you always start no matter what, no matter how many times you refresh. But then because we want to move our user left and right, we're going to have to track that. So I'm going to have a let current position, as this will change, so it needs to be a let. And to start off, I'm just going to assign that to the user start. So I hope that makes sense. It will in a bit. We've got a starting position. Then I'm assigning that starting position to the current position of our user, because that will always change. But we want it to be that to start. So we've got our current position and the X and Y axis. Now, just like we did here, I'm going to get the current position and I'm going to get the X axis from it. So the first value, and just use pixels. And let's do that for the style bottom too of the user. So go into the current position, get the second value and add pixels. Cool. So now if we refresh, that's where our block, or our user block, will show up. Okay, so we've done that. Now let's go to moving our user left and right. So I'm going to do this. So we've added our user, move user. Okay, to move our user, we're going to have to use keys. So I'm actually going to write a function called move user and pass through an event. And then I'm going to use the switch case to listen out for keys. Okay, and I'm going to use a switch case for this because we're simply going to be listening out for arrow left or arrow right. And we can use a switch case for this. So this is how you write a switch case. You would pass in through something here, and if it equals the case, then you execute the code, and then you break out of it. So if you haven't looked at switch cases, please do, but this is what we're going to be using. So I don't know how many of you know about keys on your keyboard, but essentially, whoops, if what I'm writing here, so case arrow left, so I'm passing through the event, and the event, if I literally click a key on my keyboard and the value assigned to that key has the value of arrow left, then I essentially want to move my current position, right? So if I press arrow left, I want to take away from the x-axis of our current position. So I would do so by grabbing the current position and this, the x-axis, so the first item from that array. And I'm just going to minus 10 to the value. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And then once again, I'm going to reassign value. Okay, so actually I'm going to be using this a lot, so I'm going to put this in its own function. I'm going to call it draw user function. I'm just going to do this to avoid repetition. Draw user. I'm literally just going to take this code out and replace this with the function draw user to make our code cleaner. So now instead of drawing the user again here by literally writing out that code again, I'm just going to put draw user. So we're going to move the x-axis position and we're going to redraw the user. So that is what we're going to do, and then we're going to break. So let's check that out. First off, we need to attach this. So let's grab the document again and use a JavaScript method called add event listener to listen out. So I'm not making this up. Key down is an event that we can listen out for. So we're listening out to any time I press any key on my keyboard. That's what key down does. You can have key up as well, but I think key down makes more sense than listening out for when you take your finger off a key. And then I'm going to put move user, so the function. So anytime I press a key down on the keyboard, we're going to listen out, we're going to invoke this function and then see if the key is arrow left. And if it is, we're going to move the x-axis of our current position 10. So let's do this. I'm pressing left. There it goes, left. It's moving 10 pixels, awesome. But it also goes off. So that's a problem. Let's fix that. We're going to fix this with an if statement. So case arrow left. I'm just going to write if, as long as the current position, so the x-axis of our user is larger than 0. So as long as it's larger than 0, then we execute this code. Okay, so that's all I'm writing. As long as our user, so this point right here, is larger than 0, because this is 0, then we can move left. Otherwise, we stop. We don't execute the function anymore, so it appears like we are stopping. So that's what I have done with that. Let's now do the same. So there we go. For the case of if we press arrow right. So it's essentially the opposite. If current position x-axis is smaller than the board width. Have we declared what the board width is? No. Const board width equals 560. So as long as we're smaller than that, we want to get the current position, and let's just add, add 10 this time. And then we have to redraw the user, right? Because it's got a new position. We need to redraw the user. And we break out of this. So now let's see. Ah, it's not stopping. Ah, but it stops there. This is because this is our anchor point, remember? So we're going to have to minus the width of the block. So minus block width. So now, once again, stop. Nice. Stop. This is looking good. I like it. Let's carry on. So we are moving our user. That is good. I think the next thing we want to do is create a ball. So add ball. Once again, let's create a ball. Let's use document, create element to create a div. Now let's get the ball and use class list, add, and then a class of ball, which we have not yet written. Let's do it now, ball. Let's make it width 20 pixels, height 20 pixels. Border radius to make it look like a circle, 10 pixels. Background color, red. And we also need to give it a position absolute, as with everything, if you want to start assigning it left and bottom values. So we've created the ball, we've styled the ball. Now we need to grab our grid and use append child to put the ball in it. So put it, this is the parent, we are putting the ball inside the parent, that's why it says append child. And there's our ball. Just as with the user, let's give it a start position. So const ball start this time. Ball start equals, and then I guess let's just make it a little bit higher. Let's see how that looks. Ball start, and then let ball current position equal ball start. Save that. And then I'm just gonna grab the ball and use style left to use the, what is it, current ball current position, ball current position, first value plus the string of pixel, and ball style right, and then we want to get the second value. So let's see what that looks like. Oh no, I don't want it there. Right. Oops, that's going to be bottom. Because we're assigning from the left and the bottom. Okay. Just going to move it over a little bit so it looks more central. So I'm just going to change this to, I don't know, 70. Okay. So that looks good. Okay. So we've added our ball. Just like with the draw user, I'm going to do the same for the ball. So draw the ball, function draw ball, and then grab the ball. Actually, I'm just going to, once again, I mean, it's just neater for me to reuse this function as we're going to be using it a bit. So that's our function. Now I've just essentially taken it, and there we go. So I've drawn the ball. Next up, I want to work on moving the ball. So move the ball, move ball. For this, I'm going to write a function. I'm going to call it function, if I can just spell it right, function move ball. Okay. So we essentially want our ball to move by adding an X and Y axis. So let's just say we want to make it move like left and right. So it looks as if it's going to the top right corner of our grid. I would do so by getting the ball current position, X axis, and adding 2. And I will do the same for the y-axis. So that will essentially move our ball. And then, of course, I would have to redraw it. draw ball. Okay, so now let's actually put this on a interval. So to do this, I would put set interval, and I'm going to pass through the move ball function, and let's say invoke it every 30 milliseconds. So now, whoosh, there it goes. Awesome. But it's going off the grid, it's going through the blocks. We need to next tackle all of this stuff. So let's tackle it not going through the grid. So when it hits the walls of the grid, I want it to change direction. So let's do that first. So first off, I'm actually going to put this on a timer ID, which I'm going to declare at the top. I'm just going to leave it blank. And we're going to have to clear this timer ID when we want the ball to stop. So I want to stop this interval by getting that timer ID and passing it through clear interval. So we've put that on a timer. The next thing I want to do is only make I want to change the direction of a ball if it hits a wall. So let's write a function called, I'm going to check for collisions. Now let's actually write the function. So function check for collisions. Okay, so first off, let's check for wall collisions. As I said, collisions. And I could do this by basically saying that if ball current position x-axis is larger than or equal to the board width, once again, minus, we need to account for the ball width itself. So let's just put ball diameter as the ball width and ball height are going to be the same. So ball diameter, const ball diameter equals 20, because we know that, because that's the width and height we gave it. So if ball current position is larger than or equal to the board width minus the ball diameter, so if it's larger, then we know it's off the grid and we need to change direction. So change direction. We need to write a function for this. Change direction. So I'm just going to write that function now. Function change direction. Okay, so currently we know that our ball is moving +2 and +2 x and y. So we need to sort of change this. So I'm going to go back here, and instead of just adding a 2 and adding a 2 here, this is going to be the x direction, and this is going to be the y direction. And let's store this as variables. Let x direction equal 2, let y direction equal 2. And we're going to change these values. So if x direction on collision deeply equals 2 and the y direction on collision, so both of these currently are 2 and 2 and they're moving 2 and 2, so essentially the ball is moving to the top right corner of our grid. We want to change the direction. And we want to change it, so imagine it's going like this. We want to change it to move like that, right? Because that makes sense in physics. So I would simply just get the y direction and change it to -2. And then return out of this. Okay. So we've done it as if it was moving to the wall. Let's actually write an if statement for if it's the top wall, so we can see if this works. We're also not invoking the check collisions function, in which the change direction function is in. So where should we move? Where should we put this? I think we want to put it in the interval. So after we draw the ball, every time we draw a ball, so every 30 milliseconds, we want to check for a collision. So still we won't be able to test that. Let's write a rule for, well, actually we might. Okay, so let's test this out. And there we go. And okay, so it's changing direction. It's hard to see because it's actually going through the top wall, but it's hitting, as soon as it hits this axis right here, it's changing direction. I'm actually going to maybe move the grid so we can see a little bit better. Let's just give it a margin top of, I don't know, 80 pixels. Refresh. And then once the red ball hits this wall right here, it will change direction. I don't really think that's the direction it should be changing. I think we should change. Okay, so if it hits that wall, I essentially want to change. Just make this an equal. It's going that way. So +2, +2. And then I want to change the X. Let's see how that looks. It's going there, and then I want it to go. Okay, I think that looks better. Let's actually get to working on this stopping at the top wall now. So if the ball current position is larger than the ball width minus the ball diameter, change direction, or if the ball current position y-axis, so let's go for the second value. Maybe I'm just going to space this out so it's easier for us to read. Is larger suddenly or equal than the board height this time minus the ball diameter, change direction. Oops, undefined board height is not defined. Did I not define that? I guess not. Const board height equals 300. We know that from our style sheet. Okay. So now, but it's also changing the, okay, let's just account for everything because at the moment, everything is essentially going to go one way. So if we hit that wall, we want to change the X direction. So now if X direction equals -2, because that's what it is, and Y direction equals 2, because that's what's happening at the moment. I want X direction to change back to 2 and return out this. So once again, that actually needs to go in here. So now let's see what happens when we hit the top wall. Okay. If X direction equals 2, actually let's keep this as Y and we return out of this. If X direction is 2 and Y direction is -2, X direction is changed to -2. If X direction, so I'm just thinking about how it now equals -2 and Y direction equals, they both equal -2, then let's just put Y direction equals 2 and return out of this. And then we've just account for one more. If x direction equals -2 and y direction equals 2, let's just make it more exact, just in case. So deeply equals for all of them. X direction equals 2 and return out of it. So I think we've now accounted for all of them. Let's see how that looks, all the combinations. So hit the top wall, bam, bam, pff, awesome. Obviously that won't happen, and it goes to the bottom. So let's actually write rules for the other two now. So we also know that if the ball current position x-axis is going to be smaller than or equal to 0. So if it goes off the left-hand side of the board, then we want to change its direction before that happens. And then check for game over. So if ball current position y-axis this time is smaller than or equal to 0. So if it goes off the bottom of the board, we want to clear interval timer ID. So we want to stop it. And let's also get like a console log out. Or actually, let's just put it in the display. So let's get a div. Let's give it the ID of score. I'm just going to hardcode 0 for now. Let's pick it out. So const score display equals document query selector, and then let's look for the score, but the ID of score. Okay, so let's actually show. So let's get the score display, and in that HTML, I'm just going to put, yeah, this. Okay. I'm also going to get rid of the event listener, so we can't move the user anymore. Remove event listener, key down, move user, so we can't move the user. So now it's going to hit the top wall, it's going to change directions again, and when it hits the bottom, boom, you lose, and it stops, and we can't move our little user, so the purple user, anymore. Cool. Let's change the direction to check if it's going through the left side. So I'm just going to do this by putting, I think, -2 and okay, that one. So go hit the top wall, change direction, and boom, everything looks like it's working. This is looking great. Now, time for the tough part. I'm going to check for collisions for any of the blocks. So let's do it. Okay, so in our check for collisions function, let's just do it up here. Check for block collisions. And I'm going to have to use a for loop for this. So for let I equals 0, as long as I is smaller than the block's length, we increment I like so. Okay, now I'm going to have to essentially check if the ball is in between the blocks bottom left x-axis and bottom right x-axis, so the bottom width, and also in the height. Okay, so if it's in there, we know it's a collision, right? So we need to write this and we need to loop it over for every block. So I would do so if, you need to do it with an if statement. So if, it's going to be a long one. So we're going to go into our, actually let's use the, okay, I'm just going to use the ball current position. Let's check the x-axis first. So if the ball's x-axis is larger than the block, so I'm going to go into the first block and check the bottom left, because that's our anchor, x-axis. So if it's larger than the bottom left x-axis, but smaller than the bottom right x-axis, we know it's in the middle of the block. So if it's larger than that and ball current position x-axis, so the first value is smaller than, I'm just going to get rid of this so we can see the JavaScript, is smaller than, go into the blocks, the first block, use bottom right x-axis. Okay, so all of that is true, that statement is true, and now let's do the y-axis, the ball current position y-axis, and let's account for the ball diameter. So maybe let's put that in brace parenthesis 2. So if now the y position is smaller than the blocks, we're going into the blocks again, and we're going to use I, and then we're going to get the bottom left y-axis and the ball current position y-axis is smaller than whatever block we're looking at, top left y-axis. So if all of this is true, all of these statements are true, then we know that we are in, our ball is in a block, it's in the area of a block. Okay, so if all of that is true, well, what do we want to happen? Well, I guess I want to remove the block. To do this, I need to remove the class of the block we've just hit. So we need to grab all the blocks from our document, grab all blocks. So I'm going to go into the document and use query selector all to grab anything with the class of block. And let's make this an array by using the JavaScript method of array from. So I'm going to put that like so. So now, so I'm just going to console log this to see what all blocks look like. Okay, so I refresh and we collide with any block. One of undefined. Great. What have we done wrong? Top left needs to be capital L. Okay. So now when we collide with a block, bam, we get all the divs with a class of block in an array. You can see it's an array because of the square brackets. So that's what the all blocks looks like that we've just console logged. So we're going to get all the blocks, and now all blocks, we're going to go into that array of blocks, wherever I is, because we're looping, so whatever block we're dealing with, and we're going to use class list to remove the class of block. So visually, we won't see the block anymore. It will still be there though, so we need to get rid of that too. So we need to get rid of it essentially from this array as well. We need to get rid of whatever block we are dealing with and remove it from this array. So removing the class is completely different to removing it from the other array that we have it in. So I've used splice to essentially get rid of whatever the index is. So and we do it like so. So just remove the one item. So whatever, say we hit the block with index 2, we then need to remove it from our blocks array by using splice and passing through a 2 into here. So we remove it. So once we removed it, we also need to change direction. Cool. Okay. So let's see if that's worked. Boom, boom. And it's changing. Nice. And then you lose. Okay, so this is looking good. I think maybe let's also add a score. So score plus plus, and then score display inner HTML, whatever the score is. And let's set score at the top. So let score start with 0. Just so we can keep track of how many we are hitting. Okay, so the next thing we've to do in collisions, so we've accounted for collisions in here. We also need to check for user collisions, right? So if our little paddle hits it. So I'm going to do that in here. Check for user collisions. And now so once again, if ball current position x-axis is larger than the current position of our user's x-axis, so if that's true and the ball current position x-axis is smaller than the current position x-axis plus the block width. So we are essentially checking if the ball is in between the two sides of our user and wherever it is, its current position. So if that is true, maybe let's put this in its own. Okay, so if that is true and the ball well, we could just do it by, no, let's just make it for the whole. I was going to say we could just do it if it hits the top of our user, but let's just do it properly. If the ball current position y-axis is larger than the current position y-axis and the ball current position y-axis is smaller than the current position of our user y-axis plus the block height. So if the two are in the same space, we then also want to change direction. So check it out. So now I'm moving, it's gonna hit, boom, 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 boom. This is looking fun, boom, boom, boom. And we're adding to the score, everything is looking great. I think we only have one last thing to do. Obviously, this is just a very basic, simple game. If you want to be super precise, like you can see sometimes the ball is passing through a block a little bit. I think this one might pass. No, it didn't hit it. Then please do fiddle around with the if statements. Okay. Now we have one last thing to do, and that's check for a win. So I'm going to do that here. So we've just added to the score, check for win. If the, I guess we're going to check the length of the block's length. So block's length deeply equals 0. Well, we're going to get the score, display, use inner HTML to display, you win. And once again, we're going to stop the game. So clear interval, timer ID. And once again, we're going to get the document and stop our little guy from moving. So key down, move user. Okay, great. And there we go. Let's just see if it wins. Now, please do expand on this game. You can add a button that will essentially start the game. That would be quite cool. So the game just doesn't start on its own when we load the browser. I would definitely do that, and it shouldn't be too difficult. You just put in the functions to move the ball in that, and perhaps as well the user. And then once you press the button, the game should start. So I'm just going to wait for this. I just want to check that we get a message that we win all of them. And then I'm going to show you how to deploy it onto the internet. So just bear with me while I win this game. You can also mess around with the score. So for example, if you pass one level, you could increase the speed of the ball. I'll show you how to do that in a second. That could be quite fun. You can also make your paddle smaller. There's so much you could do. So once again, come on, just gonna hit one more. So hit that one and then see if I can do this one. And come on, yes, you win. Okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, you can make the game harder by essentially, I mean, if I move this, change this to 10, the ball goes super fast. So that's quite fun too. I'm just going to move it back though, because I think it's too fast for me. I don't like it. Okay. In this game, we are going to make something a little bit more complicated. We are going to be building the retro game of Frogger. The aim in Frogger is to get to the other side of the pond and the road using floating logs and avoiding the cars. We are going to be building the bare basics of this game, leaving you to add styling and any other features at the end. By the end of this tutorial, you should be familiar with the following methods and properties. Okay, so let's get building. Okay, so let's do it. Let's build a Frogger game. So all I'm going to do is start off on WebStorm and I'm going to create a new project. This is going to be an empty project and I'm just going to call this Frogger and just click create.